So good morning and welcome to everyone this morning on this lovely cold February day. And I want to welcome Joe Hendershot from the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. And this is a series of programs that have to do with the environment and climate. And we're delighted that Joe is able to join us this morning and we can learn more about his organization and what he has to do and help in the idea of education and using the ballot, I suppose, to help us keep controls on the craziness. Someone mentioned to me that they heard that Amazon was considering building a warehouse in the pine forest in New Jersey and tearing that apart. And I thought that was pretty much a tragedy. I don't know whether it'll ever get to be a legislative issue or not. But that aside, you heard about that, Joe?
I can definitely touch on warehouse policy for folks if that's interesting for them.
Well, I guess is where the warehouse is, perhaps more than what it is. I guess that was, I don't know what protected. Those are not obviously protected lands, but someone was willing to take them down to put a warehouse up. But nonetheless, we welcome you. And Joe's going to do a presentation this morning. He's a field organizer for the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. He'll tell you a little bit more what a field organizer does and share with you those thoughts. Anyone who's with us can join questions along the way or put them in chat as we go. And as other people continue to join us and we learn a little bit more about our environment and the New Jersey League's position as they help us move forward. So Joe, I want to welcome you. This is part of our Temple Israel Talks program and adult education, and we are trying to become better acquainted with how those people that are involved with climate have their work ahead of them. So Joe, please, it's your microphone and take it away.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Hi, pleasure to meet you all. Like Bob was saying, I'm Joe Hendershot. I'm with the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. Let me kick this off from the beginning. Slideshow. There we go. Everyone see this? We're all good? Good, Joe. Perfect. Okay. Right, New Jersey LCV, this is us. Technically, we're 4 organizations. Taxes are a fascinating thing. But there's New Jersey LCV, the C4 one, which handles the majority of our legislative work. There's the C3 one, which is New Jersey LCV Education Fund, which handles our education programs, so stuff like this, but also voter education, as well as like voting rights work, which I handle a lot of that work as well. I didn't really include much of that, but if folks really want to know about, same-day voter registration or other ballot measures that are being worked on, vote by mail is a big thing. I'm more than versed in that and happy to talk about that as well. And I'm not going to read through all of our slides. I've learned that in presenting. But basically, our mission is education, holding elected officials accountable, and advocating for sound policy decisions, at least on the C4 side. That was essentially this, right? We go through elections, go into the legislative session, we then evaluate the work of the elected officials. So just as a quick background thing, LCV is a national organization that started right in the 70s. It was actually a formulation out of Sierra Club at that time. Didn't have any political work that they were doing. So during the 70s, right, 69, 70, they were like, okay, well, we need to create sort of a political leaning organization to work for the environment. Hence, they created LCV at the national level. New Jersey LCV really got started in 2010, and then our current executive director starting in 2012. So the PAC and Super PAC are sort of our political leanings. Those are the other 2 organizations of LCV. If you want to learn more about what a PAC and Super PAC are capable of doing, I'm more than happy to talk about those as well. It's essentially just money and how it is spent during elections. I think a lot of folks have sort of heard about them, or at least kind of know the name. But these are sort of the topics I wanted to touch on today. I'll give some quick overviews of sort of what the current state of play is in New Jersey regarding them, but sort of stormwater and water quality. Clean energy, right? That's a big one. Current legislation and policy happening. Oh, I did have a little bit on democracy here, but I don't know if I have it in the slides. And then sort of the role of the individual in the environment. So this is one that's always sort of I don't know the right way to put it, but basically it's really a question for ourselves that we always have to deal with. But moving through, right? So as an example, there's this idea of recycling versus composting that we see, sort of like what the individual can do. And like all of us, I think everyone in New Jersey pretty much recycles. It's sort of been a very structural thing that's been like built into us. Everyone has recycling cans. Every every apartment complex has some form of recycling. Everyone pretty much does it. Composting, though, is something that essentially no one in the state does. Like individually, there's very few people who do it. Although the people I know who do it are very adamant about it, and they're a great group of folks, but it is one of the few things that they actually talk about. But as I move through, right? So the actual process of recycling, right, is a process essentially of resale of materials. But the role of the individual, I hope you can all see that little red arrow, right? Like essentially all that we do is use and then take the recycling materials and put them into collection bins. The rest of the process is done by companies and larger facilities. So there's not really much power that the individual has necessarily in the recycling process, other than sort of say with elected officials at like the county level. Many counties are what actually conduct the recycling process, right? The county recycling centers, and they'll usually only do specific things, right? Certain types of plastic or like cardboards, for instance, right? But the thing with recycling is that they want to sell this material after to fabricators, right, to use that raw material. And when you sell recycling products, they usually grade them essentially by like what percent is pure. So say for the plastic or for the cardboard, right? And a lot of fabricators really want very pure materials. So that's sort of where like the role of the individual in the recycling process, while seemingly big, actually is quite small. So there's very much an issue there, right? But if we move towards composting, right, the role of the individual in composting is exceedingly greater, right? You can essentially have it right in your backyard, although it's a whole other thing about sort of how you do it and right setting up the process. But it's essentially something that the individual can do through and through. So this is sort of right one of those things I want to really discuss with folks, I think, as we move towards legislation, as a sort of just a primer for the legislation and policy aspect, right, is to get people to understand that there are things that people can do in the environment and be an individual and really take charge of. But there's other things that are happening at a larger scale that I don't know, or people will sometimes feel like downtrodden because they've just like, oh, there's nothing I can do. Well, it's not really, right? Legislation and policy can change these things like recycling, but there are smaller things you can do, right? I think, oh, right. Wrong way, Joe. So, right, I'm going to move on to sort of this sort of policies that are coming. So, for instance, on May 4th, right, the plastic bag ban legislation goes into effect. So at grocery stores and pretty much anything larger than I forget the exact square footage, but like a bodega, anything larger than a typical bodega size, which is maybe 250 square feet. I really don't know. Yeah. There's going to be no more plastic bags, going into effect. Currently, there's also a plastic straw sort of ban in effect. But there's this whole issue of enforcement, right? If I go out to a restaurant right now, I'm still having, the servers hand us plastic straws without prompting, right? That's what has to happen right now is if you want a plastic straw, you have to ask for it. But right, these large issues, if you've ever been on like a cleanup or anything of a stream, which you should do, they're a ton of fun. And they're great, great help for the streams, right? You'll see these plastic bags are sort of embedded in the soil, right? It's quite weird when you stick your hand in dirt and then pull out plastic.